In this video, I'm going to describe how I learnt to polish and blue the screws for my clocks. My original method of screw head finishing involved a quick buff on the lathe and a hope that no one would look too closely at them. However, I always had a nagging feeling that I could do better than this, and so began my obsession with learning all I could about the fine art of screw head finishing. Here's an example of a typical screw that I've just finished by buffing on the lathe, and compare that to this screw that I've just spent 5 minutes finishing using my newfound techniques. In the first part of the video, I'm going to describe how I designed and made the screw head polishing jig, also known as a frog because of its appearance. I will then show how this jig completely transformed my ability to get a fine mirror polish on the screws. And finally, we'll look at my attempts at hardening and tempering the screws before heat treating to get the desirable blue colour. And at the end of the video, I will go through the 10 takeaways that I've learnt in this process. If you make a lot of your own screws, there does come a point when you actually want to try and achieve a decent finish on the screw head. And I've persevered on the lathe trying to achieve this, and you can get a reasonable finish, but it does take a long time. And it's difficult polishing the centre of the screw because this moves very slowly. So I decided as a side project to make a screw head polishing frog. I think that's what they call it. And it's just a hand tool that holds the screws square and steady as you draw it across various grits of diamond paper. So to start with, I came up with this shape, which I think fits fairly well in the hand. I've also got this 5mm thick scrap of brass, which is just about the perfect size. So I'm going to draw out the frog more accurately now and slightly smaller. I'll then make a template of this and I'll stick it to the brass sheet and cut it out on the bandsaw. So that's the basic shape cut out and filed to size, and now I'll take it to the drill press and drill and tap for the 2 adjustable feet. So now I'm going to drill and tap for the clamping plate. I will slice this off, it'll be a 6mm strip. But I can drill with a tapping drill now so that we can guarantee location. So that's a 12mm deep hole. Now I'll do the other one. Now I'm going to slice off the clamping plate. And then I will thread the 2 holes left in the main body of the frog, and then I'll open up the 2 holes in the clamping plate. And now I'm setting up a 45-degree angle fairly roughly in the mill so that I can cut several slots to clamp the screws firmly in place, one large for larger screws and a smaller one for the smaller screws. And finally I can make the large knurled clamping nut and the 2 adjustable feet. I've mounted it on a screw mandrel just to face. Here I'm just turning down one of the adjustable feet. This is the portion that sticks through the base of the frog, and I find it much easier to have a non-threaded portion here to gauge the height of the feet, but you'll see how this operates later. And I'm just measuring up for the threaded portion of the adjustable foot against one that I made earlier. And finally we can make the little knurled thumb screws on the adjustable feet, and that will be our frog completed, and we'll now put it to the test. Right, so here's the almost finished jig, and the idea is that you test the thickness of the screw head against these adjustable feet, and then you lock these down when they're the right thickness, and then you put your screw head through the other side, and I made a fairly hefty V-notch for that, and then you just knit these up. Doesn't need to be very tight, just to hold it securely in place. And then I've got some emery cloth here. Let's see what happens. That's working beautifully. I'm actually quite pleased with that. That's coming out really well. I think I've cut another smaller slot for a 3mm screw. Most of the screws I use for securing clock wheels are 3 or even 2.5mm. So I'm curious to see how that slot will work for this screw. I think that'll work pretty well. What I might do is drill and tap some holes for different size screws as well, but I'm just going to get the hang of the jig, and then I'm going to prepare some screws and get them to a really fine polish and experiment with some bluing, which I've never done before. So the frog tool was working so well that I've decided to really give it a tidy up and to try and make even better. And one bit I didn't like was these two front feet. It was quite hard to measure the height of the screw head, and also they tended to come undone. So what I have done is I've machined some studs, and I've taken a section of thread off it so that when that pokes through, it's much easier to gauge the height of the screw. And then to avoid the unscrewing problem and the setting problem, I've made these two large thin knurled locking nuts and a knurled thumb screw, which I'm going to lock tight onto the top. And then I'm going to really put the tool to the test. And I've got these two screws that I made some time ago, and I just got them roughly to shape on the lathe. So now I'm going to use the frog tool and see how much of a polish I can get on them, and then I will attempt to harden them and blue them. So first I'm going to set the height of the screw, which is way easier to gauge now. And then I've got these 6 grits of emery cloth. I've got 320 for flattening it off, 600, 1200, 2K, 5K and 10K. And I've got a tub of water here, so I will decontaminate it between each grit. And I think the other important thing is to not remove the screw from the holder, just to ensure that it stays horizontal the whole time. So here goes. I'm doing linear passes so that I can look at the pattern and make sure it's touching all areas, and that screw is now looking flat after just a few passes, so I'm just going to rinse that off. and we'll move on to the 600 grit. I'm going to go across the grain this time so that again I can just make sure I've contacted the whole surface. I think if I've missed any bits it's going to become very apparent when I start to polish. Up to the 1200. $2K. And now it's becoming apparent that I didn't get the screw head completely flat on the first. I don't know if you can see that but around the edges it's not quite flat, so I'm going to go back and try and get that flat. Right, I think I'm finally there with the 320 grit. I think I know what the problem was, and that's because when I tried to use the lathe to get a decent finish on, I had put a bevel on the screw because obviously the edges of the screw are moving much faster than the center, so you're going to take more material off the edges. So I think for the second screw I'm going to put it back in the lathe and get a lathe flat finish before I start the 320 grit. So now I think I can move on to the other grits and we'll see what this one looks like after the 10,000. And that's the first screw after the 10,000 grit, which is pretty good. I probably should have taken a little bit more off the screw with the 320, but I think that's good enough. So I've set up the second screw and the finish is straight off the lathe, so quite nice and rough, so we'll really see what this jig can do now. So I've machined a thin-walled mild steel container and I'm going to fill it with boric acid mixed with alcohol to surround the screws, and this should stop them crusting up when they're heated. And then apparently you can put the screws in boiling water and the resulting crystalline deposit will dissolve and you should be left with a perfect screw. So I've quenched the silver steel screws in water and now I'm going to try the file test. And the file is cutting rather too easily, so that completely failed. I think I didn't leave it at red heat for long enough, but I'm going to try a different technique now. So I've ditched my steel container and I'm just going to coat the screws themselves with the boric acid and alcohol and heat them to red, and I can really see what's going on here, so I should get it right this time. And again, I'm going to heat them up and quench them in water. And this time the file skates over the surface, so the steel is extremely hard. So now it's time to temper. So I have boiled off the boric acid crystal and heat treated the screw at about 220 for an hour, and now I'm just cleaning it up with some diamond paste and a bit of pegwood, and then I will give the head a final polish with some very fine diamond paste on a hardboard sheet before attempting to blue it. So I've got this Bergen extra fine diamond lapping paste and I'm going to mix it with some alcohol on a piece of MDF and we'll see if that's a decent surface for getting the final polish. And here is the screw after final polishing with a quite mirror-like finish. It's not quite a black polish, but it's way better than I was expecting. So now that I'm pretty happy with the process of polishing the screws, I'm going to start with 4 brand new screws that I'm going to make for the new clock, and then I will polish them up, and finally I will attempt the bluing process. So we've now got our 4 screws, and I'm going to cut the screws head slots on my new Sierra F1, which I've picked up on eBay. And I may do a video on this little machine at some stage, but for now we'll just do the slotting. I've got it set up with a slitting saw, and heat blowing occurs when steel is heated to a specific temperature. As the steel is heated, a thin layer of an iron oxide called magnetite is formed. This oxide layer produces a reflected light color, which changes as the thickness of the oxide layer increases. A yellow starts to appear at about 220 degrees centigrade, and blue is reached at about 300. At 320, this blue will start to pale before eventually disappearing. Stainless steel and titanium can also be heat blued, but at much higher temperatures. Here is a picture of a titanium hour hand from a clock that I made some time ago, where I attempted to apply a blue at about 500 degrees centigrade and then a gold at about 400 degrees C. A titanium oxide is formed with the heat in this case. So this is my first attempt at bluing a screw, and I've drilled a suitably sized hole through a thin piece of brass, and I'm going to heat it up gently over a camping stove. The brass should provide a bit of a heat sink, so we'll get a more even colour distribution. So you can see here that the threaded section of the screw is good and blue, but the sides of the screw head are still purple. So I think the heat transfer through the thin brass is not really good enough. Although the top of the screw seems to be going blue, but it's not terribly even. So I think for my next test I will try a thicker piece of brass. Alright, it's rapidly going blue now, but more on one side than the other, which is a bit disappointing. Don't want to go too far, I think. It's just about there. So I'm going to try one more test using brass filings and hope that that will give a more even heat distribution. So first I'm just going to smoke off any impurities. There could be oil and stuff mixed in with the brass. So I'll just give that a bit of heat. And it's already smoking quite a lot. Smoking massively now, so I'll just let that smoke off and hopefully the smoke will clear. So the smoke is now cleared. The brass filings have changed colour somewhat, so I might have got it a bit hot. So I might just let it cool down a little before putting in the screw. So in goes the screw. Let's see what happens. So the first thing I noticed is that I couldn't see a thing in the daylight, so I brought it back into my workshop. So hopefully now I can observe the colour. But it's so shiny actually, it's really hard to see the colour change. So the setup is now in my kitchen where the lighting is a bit better. I found that bright white light is terrible for observing the colour change, but I've got a nice yellow light in my kitchen, so hopefully this will be a bit better. So we definitely got a straw colour, so I'll just keep it going a bit longer and hopefully we'll get the blue. And now the straw is turning purple from the centre. And finally we've got a good blue, so I will quench it in water. So still a work in progress. There's quite nice blue, but that was so hard to see the colour change. So I will keep working on trying to achieve the best possible blue. Maybe silver steel isn't ideal, but if any viewers have any comments about how to get a better result, please let me know in the comments. It's actually quite straightforward to polish out a blue that you're not happy with, and here's an example of two screws that I did. One is slightly underdone and purplish, the other is a very pale blue, which indicates that it's slightly overdone. So I have made some progress. The four smaller screws in the centre of the photograph are the screws that I made earlier in the video for my current clock, and the bluing is much more consistent and the colour is about what I'm after as well. So to finish the video, I just want to go through 10 takeaway points that I think might help anybody else who wants to try their own bluing. The first takeaway is cleanliness, which is absolutely crucial. You must ensure that you don't get any contamination between the various grades of diamond lapping paper. Otherwise you'll be ruining your time spent with the finer grits. These self-adhesive diamond lapping papers are absolutely fantastic for honing and polishing the screw heads. Ideally you would stick them to individual pieces of glass to prevent cross-contamination. My third takeaway is to stress the importance of getting a really good mirror polish finish before attempting to blue. You'll get a much more even blue. After the final polish, clean with acetone, not alcohol. Alcohol tends to leave streaks which can affect the bluing. When bluing, use a thicker piece of brass which will much more evenly distribute the heat for a better bluing. For me, brass filings worked better than the brass sheet. I felt I had more control over the bluing process. But if you're going to use brass filings, it's essential that you burn off all the impurities, because these may affect the bluing process. This extra fine Bergen lapping powder produced an excellent result when mixed with alcohol and used on an MDF sheet. Actually trying to see the blue taking place was a real challenge for me. I tried lots of different lights, from the LEDs of my workshop, which are quite bright and white, to daylight, which was also difficult. And finally I found the kitchen lights, which were an orange glow, to be much the best. My final takeaway is on the actual making of the screw. I found that if I cut the slot and then faced the screw on the lathe, I tended to get some breakout in the slot. So my advice is to face the screw and then slot it and then do the polishing. I have learnt so much in the making of this video, and I hope that what I've been through may be of assistance to any of my viewers who want to make and polish and blue their own screws. Thank you for watching.